I turned the key, and the apartment answered with a hollow echo that sank straight into my chest. The living room stood frozen, as if it had held its breath waiting for me to understand the silence. My eyes wandered across furniture that looked guilty, still, and almost apologetic. The air smelled different, like distance, metal, and something painfully over. The couch still carried the shape of laughter, but none of its warmth remained. I walked carefully, as though stepping on broken promises scattered underfoot. The blinds cut the morning light into small, merciless stripes across the wall. Every photograph stared back. Too quiet, too knowing, too cruel. My heartbeat became the only living sound in a house that had stopped breathing. I whispered his name, and the walls swallowed it like a secret they'd promised to keep. A mug half full of coffee sat on the table, the last trace of routine pretending to be normal. My throat felt heavy, swollen with questions that had no safe landing. I wanted to scream, but fear sat in my mouth like a guest refusing to leave. The keys fell from my hand, ringing like a tiny funeral bell for my old life. Somewhere outside, a car alarm went off. I wanted it to be him coming back, but only the echo answered, reminding me that absence has its own voice. My knees buckled, and I sat on the floor, hugging my trembling reflection in the glass door. Grief pressed its cold hands against my ribs, measuring where to break me first. I told myself to stand, but my legs no longer recognized my command. I pressed my palm against the wall as if love could still be trapped inside it. Every corner whispered goodbye in a dialect only pain could translate. I tried to pray, but the words died in the same air he had already abandoned. Tears came slow, stubborn, like memories that refused to leave my skin. I realized then that silence could bruise harder than words ever could. And when I finally stood, I knew something sacred had ended here forever. I was born into a storm that didn't ask my permission to stay. My first lullabies were arguments muffled through thin apartment walls. My mother disappeared before I learned how to pronounce forgiveness. Foster homes became my geography, each one a chapter without closure. I grew up learning to smile like survival was an after-school activity. Invisible became my favorite color because it kept me safe. Every family that took me in gave me a new name and new rules for silence. Love was a currency I could never afford to keep for long. I prayed to a God I couldn't see and trusted. He knew the sound of my whisper. I learned to fold pain neatly and store it behind polite laughter. People thought I was strong. I was just practiced at pretending not to need. My reflection and I argued daily about who deserved to exist. Sometimes, kindness arrived late, but it always knew where to find me. I taught myself that books could be parents and dreams could be homes. I told the mirror that someday we'd both look like peace instead of proof. But peace is expensive when your heart learned to live on scraps. I stitched hope out of paper dreams and hand-me-down courage. The girl I was never stopped looking for safety inside every stranger's smile. She became a woman who apologized too often and trusted too fast. I believed love could rewrite the story my childhood refused to finish. But love, I would learn later, can also be a thief with perfect timing. Every scar on my body was a signature from someone who left too soon, and every tear I hid became a promise to never let life win so easily. By the time I met him, I thought I had already survived the worst. I was wrong. The worst was still wearing a familiar face, waiting to arrive. The city became my classroom, and every corner taught a new version of fear. Penn Station smelled like cheap coffee, cold metal, and second chances. I slept under fluorescent lights that buzzed louder than my heartbeat. Every night, I bargained with the dark. One more sunrise, please. The benches learned my name before anyone else ever really did. I wore exhaustion like perfume, and hunger like an accessory I couldn't take off. Sometimes, the kindness of strangers felt like divine intervention disguised as luck. A police officer once called me kiddo, and I nearly cried from the sound of care. I ate leftover fries from diners that forgot to close their doors completely. Fear lived beside me, but hope refused to move out. Stubborn and small, I watched lovers kiss in the rain and wondered if safety felt like that. When morning came, I'd wash my face in public bathrooms and start again. Each coin I earned was a seed of dignity I refused to let die. I swept restaurant floors and dreams into the same plastic bag. Some nights I whispered, "Don't give up," until my throat turned raw. I built courage out of repetition, breathing, surviving, pretending. There were moments when I wanted to vanish, but God kept saying, "Not yet." I learned that the heart doesn't stop breaking just because you keep walking. I promised myself I would earn a life I didn't have to escape from. That promise became my anchor, my compass, my reason to stay alive. Every sunrise felt like applause from a universe that almost gave up on me. I wrote my name on paper napkins as if claiming existence itself. Somewhere deep inside, I knew this was only my prologue. The streets had tried to break me, but instead they trained me to rise. And I did, one trembling heartbeat at a time. He found me where the city ends and exhaustion begins. His hand smelled like oil and honesty. His eyes looked like home. He called me beautiful in a way that sounded like proof. We built a life out of small paychecks and shared laughter. 10 years later, that laughter had grown into 2 children. Motherhood softened my scars but sharpened my fears. We had love, but love alone couldn't pay rent or erase pain. When he left, I kept the children and the determination. Night school became my battlefield and my redemption. I studied formulas by candlelight while my kids slept nearby. The hum of city buses became my lullaby and my prayer. Every diploma I earned carried the fingerprints of my struggle. Women at bus stops became my tribe, my unspoken sisters. We exchanged survival tips like soldiers swapping war stories. We laughed at pain until pain grew embarrassed and walked away. When I graduated, I cried not from pride but from relief. That paper meant I would never beg for safety again. It meant I had built something no one could repossess. I found better work, a better paycheck, a better mirror. I told my daughter that her mother was not a tragedy. I told my son that kindness was stronger than muscle. We learned to live within love that didn't hurt. I dared to imagine a life without begging the universe for rest. The night I finally slept without fear, I dreamt of trains. I didn't know one would bring the next chapter of my undoing. He entered my life between train stops and deep breaths. The city hummed around us as if blessing the encounter. He was a professor, articulate, grounded, dangerously gentle. I was a survivor wearing perfume made of ambition and fatigue. He asked my name like it was a secret worth guarding. We shared playlists, coffee cups, and shy, endless laughter. I mistook curiosity for destiny and safety for love. He called me his calm, and I wanted to believe him so badly. Soon, he asked me to move in and start fresh in his world. The word fresh felt like lavender, safety, and salvation. We built a life that looked perfect from the outside looking in. He told me to quit my job and focus on school, and I obeyed. He said he wanted to take care of me, and I called it love. He managed our bills, my time, my friendships, gently at first. My world became smaller, quieter, and painted in his colors. He praised my loyalty but punished my independence. I stopped noticing that freedom had quietly left the room. Our weekends were full of smiles and curated perfection. I mistook isolation for intimacy and control for devotion. He never yelled. He didn't have to. Silence did his work. I called it protection, but it was possession in disguise. The woman I had built began to dissolve into his shadow. I looked in the mirror and saw someone trained to please. And when I smiled, I realized it was not my smile anymore. I was already disappearing, beautifully and completely unseen. Loneliness can sound a lot like laughter when you're tired. At a salon in Queens, I met the woman who would undo me. She had perfect nails, perfect hair, and perfect curiosity. She asked questions like she already cared about the answers. I mistook her charm for warmth and her flattery for empathy. We became inseparable within weeks, like sisters reborn. I told her my story, my fears, my husband's favorite meals. She listened with eyes that smiled and lips that calculated. She and her husband became our constant weekend guests. We had dinners, double dates, movie nights, my dream of family. I opened my house, my fridge, my secrets, and my defenses. She offered advice about him, about us, about my life. It sounded like care but smelled faintly of curiosity. She knew our routines better than my reflection did. I thought I was building friendship. I was feeding betrayal. When people warned me she was too close, I laughed it off. I said, "She's like my sister," not knowing how true that would be. Every secret I whispered became ammunition for later. Every kindness I offered became permission to invade. She began finishing my sentences and rewriting them. He liked her too. He said she was refreshing company. I believed he just liked to see me happy, not replaced. The two people I trusted most began speaking the same language. It was the language of opportunity wrapped in loyalty's disguise, and I was too grateful to hear the danger in every word. When I found my father after decades, joy filled every corner of me. He lived in Florida, and meeting him felt like touching history. My husband encouraged me to go, said, "Stay longer, reconnect." His tone was kind, and I mistook manipulation for generosity. She helped me pack, hugged me like a maid of honor at my own hope. The trip healed old wounds I thought would bleed forever. I cried in my father's arms and believed I was finally whole. I called my husband daily. At first, he always answered. Then his voice began to vanish, one missed call at a time. I asked him to send the return ticket, and excuses replaced love. When money finally arrived, something inside me already knew. He didn't come alone to pick me up. She came too. At the airport, she smiled first. He stayed inside the car. They looked like people who had rehearsed this moment. I climbed in, confusion fogging every thought I had. They said we were going to a party, and I said I was tired. She laughed, too loudly, and said, "Soon you'll have a baby." Her tone was sharp with secret meaning I couldn't decode. He stayed quiet, eyes forward, driving like a stranger. Something sacred between us had quietly died in that car. When I refused the party, she pouted like a betrayed child. That night, he slept on the couch without a single word. The next morning, his silence was the loudest confession I'd ever heard. Somewhere, I realized, the betrayal had already begun, and the woman I called sister had already moved into my life. He came home with a calmness that felt rehearsed, artificial, lethal. I was folding laundry, still believing in the future I had imagined. He said, "We need to talk," and my heart began its quiet funeral. Behind him, she appeared, my best friend, smiling like spring. They stood side by side, a scene I had never auditioned for. My voice cracked when I asked, "What is happening?" She spoke first, her tone dripping with sweet poison. "Sign the papers," she said. "You'll be happy again. I promise." Her words felt like knives dipped in honey, soft but fatal. He didn't look at me. His eyes belonged to another universe. I felt my knees melt into the floor, grief taking full control. They spoke of my life like real estate. Neat, simple, transferable. She said we could all celebrate later, as if betrayal was champagne. I wanted to scream, but silence chained my throat to disbelief. The room blurred between my tears and her bright, cruel grin. I saw the reflection of my own heartbreak in her nail polish. He handed me the papers like a stranger delivering bad news. I signed because my shaking hands couldn't find another language. She clapped her hands softly. Yes, she actually clapped. That moment, I realized evil can wear lipstick and empathy. I screamed after they left, a sound that even God must have heard. The neighbors knocked, but I couldn't answer through sobs. I tore my wedding photo until it looked like snow. The apartment felt haunted by echoes of a love that died proud, and I knew my best friend had buried me while smiling. The next morning, the world was a blur of humiliation and dust. He had packed his things overnight and vanished like a thief. I searched every drawer and found only the ghost of his perfume. Then came the call from a neighbor. "They're moving your stuff out." I froze, holding the phone as if it might burn through my palm. She said, "Your husband, your friend, and her husband are here." I ran out the door, breathless, like running from my own body. By the time I arrived, the truck was already closing its doors. I saw my curtains, my memories, my life, all boxed and gone. A police car stopped because I was screaming on the sidewalk. They came upstairs, saw the emptiness, and one whispered, "Coward." I sat on the floor, surrounded by silence that no longer belonged to me. A female officer put her hand on my shoulder. I melted into sobs. She said, "You'll rise from this," and I wanted to believe her lie. I called my friend, still hoping for sanity, but she didn't answer. Another neighbor said, "Don't call her. She's part of this." The walls seemed to spin, betrayal echoing in every direction. That night I slept on the floor with nothing but my wedding ring. I sold it the next morning for food, because survival doesn't wait. Each bite of bread tasted like pride turned into dust. I moved between friends' couches like a ghost learning to breathe. He blocked me on everything, as if I had never existed. She told people I'd gone crazy, the perfect cover for her sins. My tears became my only currency, my only proof of being human. I whispered to myself, "You lost everything, but not your soul." Days turned into weeks. and whispers turned into daggers. People looked at me like a scandal wearing cheap perfume. He was the professor, the good man, the devoted husband. I was the woman from the streets, the broken one, the mistake. She told everyone I had been unfaithful, delusional, unstable. They believed her, because betrayal always wears better makeup. I stopped going to the market just to avoid their pitying eyes. At night, I replayed every smile she ever gave me like evidence. Each one now looked like a weapon I had handed her myself. He emptied my bank account, my closet, and my credibility. Even the lawyer she recommended was already his. The betrayal wasn't a moment. It was an empire they built. I tried to scream my truth, but no one wanted to listen. My phone was silent. My friends had chosen sides. I started to believe maybe I really was the crazy one. I stopped eating, stopped answering calls, stopped existing. Depression came dressed as exhaustion, whispering, "Rest forever." But a tiny voice inside said, "No, you've been here before." The girl from the street still lived inside me, fists clenched. She refused to die at the hands of love and lies. So I got up, washed my face, and wrote my name again. I promised the mirror, "They'll not end me, I will begin me." And that night, for the first time, I slept without their ghosts. Because sometimes survival is not strength, it's pure defiance. And I had always been good at that. Months later, truth arrived quietly, through a picture. A friend sent me a photo taken at a grocery store in Brooklyn. He was there, with her, pushing a baby stroller. The baby looked about 6 months old, perfect and smiling. My stomach turned to ice as time folded itself cruelly. So that was the baby she said I'd have, the one she meant for herself. It all aligned. The vitamins she gave me, the sudden kindness. She had already been pregnant when she smiled at my divorce. Her husband had left her too, broken by the same deception. They built their new world on the ashes of mine. And for the first time, I didn't cry. I just exhaled. It wasn't disbelief anymore. It was understanding. I realized I'd been nothing more than a rehearsal for their show. They used my love as the blueprint for their comfort. But comfort built on betrayal always collapses eventually. I didn't wish them pain. I just wished them truth. And truth is the most painful gift life ever delivers. He still never contacted me, but silence became my closure. The city didn't look cruel anymore. It looked honest. Every streetlight whispered, "You survived them." I learned that peace doesn't come from revenge, but release. I didn't forgive them. I forgave myself for not knowing. I walked home lighter, unburdened by ghosts. And for the first time in years, I smiled. For me, not for anyone else. Because I had finally become my own rescue. Healing wasn't fireworks. It was slow, painful, and painfully quiet. I met a therapist who said, "You don't need to be fixed, just heard." For the first time, I spoke without fear of being judged or pitied. He listened like every word was a fragile bird landing safely. We unpacked the weight of every goodbye I'd ever survived. He told me I had been loved wrong, not unworthy of love. That sentence alone stitched something back together inside me. I learned that control disguised as care is still control. I learned that trust without boundaries is an invitation to break. Each session peeled away layers of shame I didn't know I wore. I started writing again, not to remember, but to rebuild. The woman in the mirror began to look like someone I respected. Her eyes were still tired, but no longer afraid to shine. I stopped apologizing for existing, for feeling, for wanting peace. My past became a library instead of a prison. I visited it only to learn, not to live there anymore. I found work again, humble, honest, and my own. I rented a small apartment that smelled like independence. Some nights I still cried, but now the tears felt cleansing. I laughed again, even when no one was watching. Healing isn't forgetting, it's remembering differently. Pain became my teacher, not my identity. I promised myself, never again will love cost me my sanity. And for once, I kept a promise to myself. That was the day I knew I was free. 8 years later, I am not who I was. I am who I became. I wake up early, open my windows, and let the sunlight right on me. My scars are now signatures of survival, not shame. I walk without apology, without hunger for anyone's validation. The world once broke me, but I learned how to bend instead. I still think of them sometimes, but only as a lesson. Forgiveness isn't necessary when you've outgrown the wound. I no longer fear being alone. Solitude has become my sister. I found new love, gentle love, one that doesn't need to own me. I learned to say no without explaining my reasons. I celebrate small victories. A quiet night, a paid bill, a calm heart. Happiness no longer feels like a prize. It feels like a decision. I mentor women now who stand where I once fell. I tell them, "You are not broken. You are just unfinished." We cry together, laugh together, rebuild together. Every story I share is another piece of my healing. If pain had a purpose, this must be it, to light the way for others. When I look back, I don't see weakness. I see rebirth. I am both the girl who was left and the woman who stayed. I am proof that love can destroy you and still not define you. He took everything, but he couldn't take my becoming. She smiled when I broke, but I smile now because I healed. And that, I've learned, is the most beautiful revenge of all. I close my journal, whisper, "Thank you," and face the sun. Because finally, my story belongs only to me.